Okay, I've been doing a lot of UK news for a while, mostly because of the midterm election. I think the Kavanaugh hearing, Brazil. What else have we been talking about? There have been a lot of topics that have distracted me from it. So the Brexit vote was something that in, years and years ago, I would say probably in the mid 2000s, I started to see that there is this growing movement within the UK to oppose the Treaty of, I think it was the Treaty of Lisbon, which was um, one of the big treaties that created the framework for the dominant transnational state in Europe, the European Union, and one of the reasons that it's really falling apart now. And eventually, I believe that the EU will fall apart completely, and possibly the only few countries that will remain are the Low Countries, which are Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and then Italy. Well, not Italy, France and Germany. Those countries would probably be the only ones I think would end up staying. But in any case, Theresa May has put forward through her cabinet her Brexit plan. So we're going to read some of the key points according to Sky News. And, if I miss anything, if there's something like important that they left out, because, of course, you can't really trust any of these media outlets. I'd appreciate it if you could send it to me if you're from the UK or if you're familiar with the situation more than I am. But I will give my opinion after I read through this. So Theresa May's draft Brexit agreement has been agreed by her cabinet after more than 18 months of negotiations with the EU. It took 5 hours of discussions inside Downing Street before the Prime Minister was able to hail the, quote, decisive step. The Conservative Party has had a string of high-profile resignations over Brexit, and it is understood around 10 ministers were opposed to Mrs. May's draft deal. Sky News breaks down the key points from the 585-page document. So the customs union. The draft agreement states that the UK and the EU want to establish ambitious arrangements in this area in their close future relationship. It adds that there will be a single customs territory until the end of the transition period on December 31st, 2020. The UK will remain in a customs union with the EU indefinitely if a new trade agreement is not reached in that time. So basically, Theresa May has said that this issue, keeping the UK within the customs union, which would probably obligate it to a lot of EU regulations that it doesn't even have a voice in formulating, I would say that is a tremendous loss for the British economy and the state. The fact is that by default they will remain in the customs union if a new trade agreement isn't reached. That's ridiculous. If anything, it should be the opposite. Maintaining such an agreement has served as a measure to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland. The Republican of Ireland's Tozik, by the way, is the Prime Minister of Ireland, Leo Varadkar, said the issue has been one of the most difficult challenges in the negotiations. He said a backstop will remain in place unless and until a better solution is agreed. Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator, has said a trade deal between the UK and EU is possible by the end of 2020. Northern Ireland. The document details plans for what a backstop for the Irish border would look like, though it notes that neither side wants this outcome. It would involve Northern Ireland being in the same customs territory as the rest of the UK and the EU. So they're basically, the only difference that's going to be happening going forward is that the United Kingdom will have no political power within the EU. Not that it has a ton right now, but like anything that they have right now will be gone because they can't vote in the European Parliament because they're technically leaving the EU. And they don't have any representatives within the higher echelons of the organization, of the international organization of the EU. So they don't have any officials dealing with banking, dealing with trade, dealing with regulations in any of the industries. They basically get the worst of all worlds. This would involve level playing field commitments to ensure trade in goods between the UK and the EU is based on fair principles. but it would also mean different regulations for Northern Ireland, more EU law in agriculture, the environment, state aid, and other areas. There would also be checks on goods traded from Northern Ireland to the rest of the UK. So that's pretty bad. That actually sucks if you're from Northern Ireland. Enforcing those laws will mean an EU presence. EU representatives will be present to enforce and implement the law relating to Northern Ireland, and the UK will have to facilitate their work and carry out necessary control measures. So this is ridiculous. This means that, in effect, Northern Ireland will be in this is something that I am thinking about right now. I think that this almost means that Northern Ireland will become the first part of the European Union that will be basically ruled directly by the European Union. They'll basically the United Kingdom is basically giving Europe, in all but name, sovereignty over Northern Ireland, and pretending as if they don't have a choice in their own matter, because a lot of the Northern Irish population, the Protestants especially, they're huge opponents of union with the rest of Ireland. They're actually unionists. They want to remain united with the UK. The other side of the conflict there is the nationalists. They want to join the Republic of Ireland. But at the moment, I think for the next several decades, the Protestants are the majority, and they're basically being trampled on over here. And this isn't me saying who's right or wrong in the Irish conflict. I think that's a different matter to deal with. The document states that the EU and the UK will use their best endeavors to come to a future trade agreement to avoid the backstop, and notes the transition period can also be extended. Otherwise, it could be tricky to get out of the backstop. One party would need to apply to the other to end it, and an exit would have to be decided by the joint commission by the top decision makers from the EU and the UK. Okay, immigration. The document lays out rights for EU nationals living in the UK and vice versa. EU nationals who have lived in the UK continually for 5 years and Brits who have lived in EU countries will have the right to stay permanently in the UK along with their family members. What? So, and it doesn't say if the British people will have the right to stay in the EU. They will enjoy equal treatment with the nationals of that state, and so will their family members. I think it does mean that. However, there are limitations on this. The host state will not be obliged to confer entitlement to social assistance in certain areas, and it won't be obliged to give student grants or loans to people who don't yet have permanent residence. The deal also means the end of free movement, though there will be visa-free travel to EU countries. And I don't know who this person is. Faisal Islam is saying, voila, draft agreement on the withdrawal of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland from the European Union, and the European Atomic Energy Committee has agreed at negotiators level on November 4th. So this is the full draft agreement. Fishing. The UK said it will work bilaterally with the EU, but will become an independent coastal state. The draft deals say the UK will be consulted on fishing opportunities and invited to comment regularly on the EU's fishing policies. A committee will be set up between the UK and Spain for regular discussion between the competent authorities in relation to Gibraltar. Scotland Secretary David Mundell has given his backing to the draft Brexit deal, claiming it will deliver for the fishing industry. All 13 Scottish Conservative MPs said they would not support an agreement which would prevent the UK from independently negotiating access and quota shares. He said, I was content to move to the next stage of the process on the basis that Brexit will deliver for our fishing industry, as I and colleagues set out in our letter, and on the basis that arrangements for Northern Ireland will not undermine the economic or social or constitutional integrity of the UK. I hope there will be agreement at the European Council later this month. We can move to a vote in Parliament. The worst possible outcome for Scotland and the whole of the UK would be a no-deal departure from the EU. So basically, what was promised during Brexit by the Leave people, which is not the people that are running the negotiations, would be full British sovereignty over their waters, and the fishermen would be able to fish without hindrance from the EU. And that's not what's being delivered. They're basically saying, well, everything's going to be negotiable from now on. Everything's going to be negotiable. They say, I hope there will be an agreement at the European Council later this month, and we can move to a vote in Parliament. And it also says the UK will be consulted on fishing opportunities and invited to comment regularly on the EU's fishing policies. So no, they don't have any control over that. What have the UK and EU leaders said? Theresa May, UK Prime Minister. Mrs. May said the agreement was the result of thousands of hours of hard negotiation. When you strip away the deal, the choice before us is clear, she said. This deal, which delivers on the vote of the referendum, which brings back control of our money, laws, and borders, ends free movement, protects job security in our union, or leave with no deal or no Brexit at all. I know that there will be difficult days ahead. This is a decision which will come under intense scrutiny, and that is entirely as it should be and entirely understandable. But the choice was this deal, which enables us to take back control and to build a brighter future for our country, or going back to square one with more division, more uncertainty, and a failure to deliver on the referendum. So she's basically, well, we'll get to Theresa May. Then there's Arlene Foster, the Democratic Unionist Party leader. So she's probably not happy at all. There was much in the agreement that the DUP may have felt unhappy about. Arlene Foster tweeted a curt response a few hours after the big reveal. She said, "We had a frank meeting tonight with the Prime Minister lasting almost an hour. She is fully aware of our position and concerns." So I would say this, that if the DUP, which holds together the coalition, remember, Britain is now a coalition government. This is only the second time in British recent history that there's two different parties in the government. Usually one party earns enough of a majority to govern, or, well, you just need a simple majority to govern there. So essentially, it's the Democratic Unionist Party is the only reason the Conservatives are able to form a government at all. She said, "We had a frank meeting tonight with the Prime Minister lasting almost an hour. She is fully aware of our positions and concerns." Then there's Michel Barnier, EU chief negotiator. "This agreement is a crucial step in concluding these negotiations." He stressed that the draft had found a solution to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland. "Much work needs to be done. The road is still long, and it may be difficult to get an orderly Brexit," he said. And then there's Leo Varadkar, the Republican of Ireland Prime Minister. "The Irish leader said Ireland will continue with its priorities, protecting the peace process, protecting trade, jobs, and the economy, and keeping Ireland in the EU. He said today had brought a satisfactory result to those aims. Our analysis has always shown that Brexit will be bad for Ireland. Therefore, our approach has always been to seek to minimize the harmful impacts of Brexit on Ireland and to maximize any opportunities, no matter how few." So this leaves out a lot of issues here. Okay, the sovereignty of the EU of Britain from the EU has a lot to do with the industries, all of the banking industry, manufacturing, agriculture. They don't talk about that at all. They make a little bit of an allusion to fishing, which was pretty important, but it's not the real reason people wanted to leave the EU, which is just the unbelievable overreach of the EU into the private affairs of people in those countries. The EU is basically a rising dictatorship that will pretty soon, they're talking now about actually implementing a new EU army. So what about Theresa May? Theresa May up here. Well, she is in deep shit right now, because she's facing a call for a vote of no confidence tomorrow, which means today. So probably in about 8 or 9 hours, we'll know a little more about that. Brexit supporters will likely call for a vote of no confidence in her as their leader tomorrow. BBC political editor Laura Kunsberg said, citing a senior member of the Conservative Party, she said Brexiteers were so angry about May's deal to leave the European Union that they were submitting letters to the head of a committee of conservative lawmakers responsible for handling any leadership challenge. Senior Tory conservatives A senior Tory tells me Brexiteer anger is so high that seems likely there will be a call for no confidence vote tomorrow. Letters going in, she said on Twitter. If 48 letters are sent to the Conservative backbench 1922 committee, this will trigger a showdown. At the moment, it is not clear how many have been sent, but anger is brewing at what has been described as a worst of both worlds Brexit. Leading Brexiteer Jacob Rees-Mogg, who was previously held back from calling for Mrs. May's removal, said yesterday that there comes a point at which the policy and the individual become so intimately connected that it will be very hard to carry on supporting the person who is promoting this policy. So Jacob Rees-Mogg, who, by the way, is kind of this very aristocratic guy, but he's pretty popular among some, like a certain sector of the population, especially the Brexiteers. He's considered one of the leading candidates to replace Theresa May as the new prime minister, or as possibly the Brexit secretary if Boris Johnson takes over. That's one of the other people. Tensions were heightened by reports that senior Brussels negotiator Sabine Weyand had told ambassadors the deal will mean the UK aligns its rules with Europe, while the EU will retain all the controls. Speaking in the Commons, leading Brexiteer Peter Bone told the PM, if the media reports about the EU agreement are in any way accurate, you will not be delivering the Brexit people voted for, and today you will lose the support of many Conservative MPs and millions of voters across the country. The deputy chairman of the European Research Group of Eurosceptic Tories, Marc Francois, said cabinet ministers should look into their hearts and decide whether a Jaguar and a red box and a bunch of sycophantic civil servants calling you minister is more important than the destiny of your country. Leave backing Tory MP Andrew Bridgen said, this isn't Brexit, it's not even close to Brexit. If it were darts, it's not missing the board, this is not even the right wall. So, there's not that many comments, but Theresa May, I would say, is now considered across the political spectrum to have been one of the worst prime ministers in British history. Worse than David Cameron, who came before her. Worse than Gordon Brown, who came before him. And maybe the only person more unpopular among British of all political persuasions right now is Tony Blair, who took the country into the Iraq War. So I think that for the interests of the British people, they need to replace her as soon as possible before they're forced eventually to call an early election and to face Jeremy Corbyn taking over the country, who would be the worst prime minister of any country ever, because he's a complete idiot and has never even figured out how to run a blender, probably. But yeah, Theresa May, complete ineptitude on Brexit, an opponent of freedom of speech, throws people basically in jail for small childish insults and things like that. But of course, when it comes to rape gangs, when it comes to rampant illegal immigration, when it comes to a collapsing healthcare system, she doesn't have any answers. She doesn't really care at all. So I think we're talking about choppy waters ahead for Britain. But let me know what you think. If you know a little more, I've been a little bit out of the picture for a while. So please like this video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to my other channel, Razor Ray Live Wounds, and comment when it uploads. Please contribute to the Patreon if you want to tip me, and I'll see you guys later.